Welcome to Let's Unravel. Random thought. Have you been outside yet today? Because I know I haven't, and that's probably something I should fix. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a new listener or a friend of the podcast, I just wanted to say welcome. And my new saying is going to be, since appreciation never goes out of style, I just wanted to say a big thank you to any of you that have been exercising those like, comment, or subscribe buttons wherever you might be listening. And now I would love to encourage you, as you find a piece of the show that really resonates or strikes a chord with you, if you wouldn't mind dropping a comment below. So that could look like writing a review on Apple Podcasts, or that could look like commenting on individual episode like today's episode on Spotify or YouTube. Your feedback really helps the show with growth and getting to new listeners, so all of those things are greatly appreciated. But now, if commenting is not your thing, I completely understand. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or liking this video on YouTube, all those things go a long way. So thank you so much. Now, moving into one of our favorite topics here at Let's Unravel, Win of the Week. The heart behind Win of the Week was to acknowledge all the wins that we might have in life. So whether they're the monumental ones like buying your first house, or whether it's the smaller ones like getting a free cup of coffee at Starbucks, or even making it on time for work. And now that I say that, that is something I've always struggled with. Even when I worked remotely, I would somehow be late for work, even when it was just showing up to my computer in my own house. But that is a conversation for another time. Anyways, so the win for this week is all about consistency. So it's not a monumental win like getting lights or posting our very first episode, but it's all about consistency, because I've noticed now that we're on episode 6 of Let's Unravel. This is crazy. And what I've learned in the last 6 weeks about recording these episodes, and I've had a lot of technical problems, and I've had to do a lot of learning on the fly. And one of the biggest things and one of the best ones I could have is consistency. It's showing up, and sometimes episodes look better than others, and sometimes all you can do is just be consistent, because after all, those small wins lead to big wins. That was our win of the week for this week. So now, without any further ado, let's move into our topic of the week. What are we going to be unraveling today? Let's unravel flatline failures. And flatline failures feels like a very epic title. The reason why is because I have this visual in my head, and I'm thinking of a heart rate monitor machine. The machine you'd see in a hospital room that's tracking someone's heartbeat. And it's making, well, it doesn't really make any noise until it flatlines. But the point is, isn't that what failure feels like? Where it's all these ups and downs, and you think you're having success or whatever it might look like, but then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it flatlines. And that's what failure feels like. It's like having the wind knocked out of your chest. No matter how desperately you try to breathe, it's like you can't catch your breath. Or it feels like you're drowning and you're getting pulled 6 feet under. No matter how hard you try to get back to the surface, you can't quite make it. And failure is devastating and it's messy, yet it's transformational. Because if it all worked out, you would have never known what failure was or what it felt like. We've all faced failure, whether it's in school, day-to-day life, career, relationships, you name it. Failure is everywhere. It's at every corner. It's a possibility, a very real possibility. And what's so unique is we've talked about humble beginnings, and we've talked about relentless resilience, and now we get to talk about the beast behind all those things, and that's failure. And to me, failure is like the beast and Beauty and the Beast. It keeps us trapped after we have set out on this adventure, trying to obtain whatever it is. And in Belle's case, it was her father. And this beast just really wants to keep us trapped in the basement of our lives. But until we can learn the importance of failure. And how do we learn the value of failure? Well, believe it or not, we need to build a relationship with failure. And just like Belle had to build a relationship with the beast, which would eventually let her go, we need to learn to no longer try to escape it. And we need to learn to no longer try to avoid it at all cost. We won't be trying to fight against it, but we'll be able to embrace it, because failure is a natural part of life. Then, just as it happened for Belle, and when she least expected it, the beast transformed into a handsome prince. Failure will be transformed into a solid ground for us to try to stand upon. So I want you to think of failure as this beast. It's not trying to destroy you. It's really just trying to give you some value behind it. We don't need to run from it. We don't need to avoid it. Really, what we need to do is embrace it, because it's a probability. Odds are at some point in time, you're going to run into it. It can't be avoided. So where do we start? let's unravel this definition of failure, because that is how we know we're all on the same playing field of understanding this topic. So failure. There's two definitions for failure. They're both nouns. And the first definition goes lack of success. And the second definition goes the omission of expected or required action. Now, I think that's a really interesting definition to give to failure, especially the first one being a lack of success. And then I think it's really interesting to see how the second definition focuses on the omission of expected or required action. So basically meaning you fell short, it didn't work out. And I really want to emphasize before we move forward, do not mistake failure as an accident, because failure and accidents are drastically different. Failure is more of a monumental overload of something, whereas mistake, and the best way to understand a mistake is if we define it. So a mistake, it's an action or judgment that is misguided or wrong. So when we put failure in comparison to mistakes, mistakes is focused on what was wrong. You didn't get it right. So if someone asked for a coffee and you gave them a tea, that was a mistake. And whereas a lot of times when we look at failure, failure is, like we said, a lack of success. So it has to do with more of you put this effort in. It's like running a marathon. And the funniest thing is recently I've become more interested in the possibility of wanting to run a marathon. So it seems to pop up all over my social media accounts. I see people running marathons all the time. And what's so interesting is when you're running a marathon, you're given a path of where you're going to run. You cross the finish line. It's not considered a failure. But what if you cross the finish line? It was, I'll make it up, 6 hours and like 10 minutes. But you wanted to beat your personal record and you wanted to do it in 5.5 hours. Well, some people would look at that and say, well, I was a failure because I set out to have this goal that I wanted to beat my personal record and hit the record of 5.5 hours. And I came in with 6 hours and however many minutes I just said. And some people would look at that and say, well, that's a failure. And that is not a mistake. And that's where the difference is. So a mistake, it's out of our control. It's something that it's wrong. It's misguided. Whereas failure, it's you can try to do something and whatever it is that you're trying to obtain, even with a marathon, you completed it. So you have the completion part done, but maybe you failed to pass the right amount of time that you wanted to have. Now that we're standing on this solid ground of understanding mistakes and failures, they're two completely different camps. And the camp that we're going to be hanging out in today is all about failure, even though both of those names are very lame camp names. I guess you could chalk it up to the fact that I never went to camp. But anyways, moving forward. If we're honest about failure, it is the very first scarlet letter that we ever learn about. And whether that is from watching TV shows and movies growing up, or whether it's experiencing it firsthand, but where is the first place that you're introduced to this concept of failure? And if you weren't already thinking about it, the first place I thought of was school. Why? Why was it school? Because we are introduced at a very young age. I mean, I think I was in like the 2nd grade by the time I started to hear about how A's are good and F's are bad. And F was a scarlet letter nobody wanted. But what did F stand for? You failed. Failure, you failed. We all knew what F stood for, and it wasn't good. Nobody wanted an F. And what's so unique is I had this experience really early on. I was in the 6th grade, and my teacher randomly pulled me aside. She gave me a quiz or a test of one of my classmates, and she gave me the answer key, and she goes, I want you to grade this test for me. So I sit down at the desk, I pull out the answer key, and I start comparing the answers to the answer key. So the first one, correct. Second one, correct. Okay, great. Everything's moving along quite well. Well, then all of a sudden I get to like the 3rd question and I start to notice this one is incorrect. And then the 4th one's incorrect. And then the 5th one's incorrect. And by the time I get to 10, because there was like 10 questions on it, from the 3rd question to the 10th question, they were all wrong. It wasn't my test. I knew whose test this was. But then all of a sudden, it was like my stomach turned into knots because I knew what this meant. I knew that I was going to have to grade this as an F. Even though it wasn't my paper, but just because I was friends with the person, it was just this unsettling feeling. I don't like it. So I walk up to the desk and I hand the teacher the test and the answer key. And she asks me this very simple question because she saw the F on the paper and she goes, how'd that make you feel? And I just shrugged and said, not good. All she said back to me was right. And it was just this really big driving force that I think as a kid, you assume teachers kind of enjoy giving out Fs. But then again, Hollywood could portray that. And, there's some teachers that probably do enjoy giving Fs. But in this case, I just remember my teacher being like, no, I don't enjoy giving Fs to students, but it's a black and white situation. It's either right or it's wrong. And that, whether I was aware of it or not in that moment, that was something that really shaped my perception of failure, because it didn't matter what side of failure you're on. So whether you're the observer, whether you're the person with the answer key, or maybe you're the person at the baseball game and you watch the guy go to propose to his girlfriend and she says no. And she's like, please get up. And you just start to cringe. The point is, even as an observer, it's painful to watch this beast called failure occur. What's even worse than watching it is having to live it. So I wanted to hold on to this idea, and this idea is centered around farmers. A variety of farmers will have cattle or just any kind of animal. And one of the first things they have to do when they get animals is they have to make a distinction on the animal to show ownership. And how they do that is by branding the animal. How they do that is they get a special stamp that they put in fire, and then they essentially brand the animal using this iron rod with their brand on it. And now whenever the animal runs away or whatever the case may be, other farmers are aware this animal belongs to them. Like we've been talking about the beast of failure, failure will leave a lasting impression on us, oftentimes like branding of an animal. If you ever talk to any person about any of the failures they've faced, they can recount those moments in their life with such a high level of emotion. It's as if the event had happened just yesterday, because those feelings don't go away. There's a lot of people where if you mention their successes, they kind of just like shoo it away. But as soon as something strikes that chord of what that beast of failure does, like it stops them in their track, because they remember how it felt to lose their breath, feel like they had the wind knocked out of them. And that is the unique thing about failure, because failure teaches us more about ourselves than success ever will. I also just really want to think about this one phrase. So many people say it's so lonely at the top. But failure's pretty lonely too. I think that's something that we always forget. We have two moments in time that help define us. It's our successes and it's our failures. I remember someone telling me once where they're like, your victories, they slowly build upon each other. It goes back to the small wins. They slowly build upon each other. But failures, you grow by leaps and bounds, because you don't want to repeat those things. Though what I think is the big difference between that beast of failure and success is we have no problem focusing on people's accomplishments. I mean, we ask people all the time, so what are your accomplishments? What have you done? So we go out of our way to ask people about their accomplishments. It's listed on resumes, all these different things. But what's so interesting is we stay as far away from people's failures, shortcomings, whatever the case may be, because there's this uncomfortableness to it, because we focus on the shame of failures. Never once has someone ever congratulated on you saying, well, at least you tried, And a lot of times if they do say it like that, it almost sounds quite sarcastic. It's like they're putting you down. And even the way I said it, it didn't sound nice. It didn't sound where it was like, well, at least you tried, in a upbeat and positive way. It was more the like, well, at least you tried, ha 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 ha, like that type of thing. So the biggest thing that we focus on with failures is we focus on the shame of it. We think about how we fell short, how we made a mistake by venturing down this way, and it's like we don't want to look people in the eye anymore because we're ashamed. We're ashamed of ourselves. Yet we have no problem listing all of our accomplishments because it builds us up. The only difference between success and failure is just the result, because you wouldn't have obtained either of those statuses without trying. There's nothing worse than when you get an F on a test and it was because you didn't show up. So yeah, you got an F, but the point is you didn't even show up. You could have possibly done better. You could have possibly done these things. Sometimes it's better to show up and to get the F than to not try at all, because then you're stuck in this land of what if, and what if is the worst place to be. When we focus on the shame of the failure, this is why people throw the towel in just before the massive breakthrough. I've been seeing these visuals everywhere all the time about how someone is mining for diamonds or gold or whatever the case is. And just as there's this tiny little layer of dirt or whatever it is that they're trying to get through, right before this massive treasure, they stop. because they're like, I'm tired. I've done this. People have been shaming me. And then they throw the towel in. And it's because failure got to them. They didn't have this healthy relationship with it. Because if you want success, if you want the results that certain people have, you have to go through the failure to get there. And you have to let go of shame. Shame will ruin your life. It will lock you in a prison and it'll throw away the key. There's one thing you can learn through all of this, and I want you to hold on to this, is if you can persist in the eye of failure, you'll persist in success. That is something that has been so incredibly valuable to me, is and even like what goes back to the win of this week about consistency. If you can show up when no one else is showing up, if you can say, this is what I'm going to do because this is the standard that I've set for myself, if you can be persistent with those things and consistent, and there's a reason why those things rhyme, but if you can be consistent and persistent with those things, you will inevitably get to success. It's just a matter of time. Just like failure is inevitable. You will somehow fail at something at some point in your life. Now, you have different types of failure. One type that we can look at is a lack of preparedness. So you didn't show up to your class to take a test. You got a 0. Well, yeah, that F is due to your lack of preparedness. Another one is falling short. So it has to do, like, perfect example is running a marathon. When all of a sudden you say, my goal for running this marathon is to do my personal best, and all of a sudden you complete it, but you didn't get to do your personal best because you exceeded the time by a little bit. That was a moment in time where you fell short. So it wasn't a lack of trying, it was just a falling short. Maybe you needed more practice and various other things as well. Third type of failure is the wrong time, wrong place. And I think it's so interesting because, once again, going back to social media, I feel like I see a lot of these videos about different like love triangles or different couples in TV shows where they're like, this person would have been the right person, but it was the wrong time and the wrong place for the main character. And it's like, wrong time, wrong place, it's still wrong. And that a lot of times is another part of failure, is it's a timing thing. It's timing, it's the place. I mean, you think about some of these businesses that have been built, and a lot of it is all about timing. And because if the world wasn't ready for it, then it wasn't ever going to succeed because the world wasn't ready to have whatever this invention was. I mean, if we look at that third type of failure of the wrong time, the wrong place, a perfect example is, we can think of that movie, the Barbie movie, how they'd been trying to make this movie for so many years. I think I had read an article about where it took like 10 years to make. I can promise you the main character that they had thought of or had in mind when they started 10 years ago wasn't who ended up being casted. When you hold on to this expectation of 10 years ago, we wanted to make this movie and it didn't happen, oh, you can easily look at that as an F, that it was, oh, it didn't work, that's the beast of failure, all those things. But really what it was it was the wrong timing. It was the wrong place, because 10 years later, it was a massive success. And that is, once again, goes back to types of failure. Wrong time, wrong place, and sometimes it just comes down to timing. One of the last types of failures I want to talk about is this out of control. You have no control over this type of failure. I always think of like last minute Johnny. It's just an idea I have in my head. It's as if you're watching a sitcom and they do like a science fair. And let's say the main character, it's like a 12-year-old kid, and he's spent all this time making his science fair project, and they're just about to award him first place. And all of a sudden, last minute Johnny comes in out of nowhere and has this revolutionary science project. And all of a sudden they're like, Johnny gets the first place prize. And you're like, I was here the whole time. Like, I did all the right things. You were seconds away from giving me this first place prize, and last minute Johnny comes out of nowhere. And right, because that is another type of failure where it's out of your control. It has nothing to do with you. You could have the write-up of everything. Everything could be going in your direction. It could seem as though it's effortless, that this is going to be your success, and out of nowhere, it's a big F. And that's another type of failure that occurs. So a great example that I want you to think of is the TV show Grey's Anatomy, and just where this flatline failure idea really comes into play. So let's think of Grey's Anatomy. Let's think of the early seasons. We're talking like George O'Malley, Meredith, that whole crew. And I remember watching the show, and it gets to the plot line where George O'Malley does not pass his intern year. So all of his other interns get to move up to being a resident, and he has to repeat his intern year. So just as all the new interns are coming in, and just as all of his peers get bumped up to being residents, so they're the ones that are actually teaching all the interns, there's this moment where he's standing in an elevator, there's a bunch of new interns all beside him, and one of his peers from the previous year is standing behind him, and they're all talking about how amazing George O'Malley is, how they're like, you know things that we don't know, you can do things that we don't know, and they're just really hyping him up. And the cruel thing that happens is one of his peers, his name's Alex Karev, if you watch the show, all of a sudden you hear behind him, he just gets fed up with hearing about how George O'Malley is so great, and all he says, he's a repeater. And that's all he says for a second, and there's like a little bit of a pause. And he goes, your big hero here, meaning George O'Malley, he goes, he repeated his intern year. And the reason why he knows all these things is because he's done them before. And then Alex proceeds to say, if you want to look up to somebody, look up to a resident. And the biggest thing you will see with failure always goes back to this. It's shame. And maybe you're not feeling shame about this failure in your life. Maybe George had worked through a majority of his shame and having to repeat his intern year, even though he didn't. Maybe in this moment he had made peace with it. I have to do this. It's part of life. And then you have an Alex Karev pop out of nowhere, basically saying, you're a repeater. You shouldn't be looking at him. You should be looking at me, or you should be looking at someone else. And the truth is if you allow people to put shame on you, it'll stick. But if you don't allow people to put shame on you, it'll fall off. Another great example I like to think about is the Disney movie Mulan, because the opening scene of Mulan was always one of my favorites, where they're getting her ready for the matchmaker. So they're dolling her all up and they're doing all these things. She looks the part. She looks very ladylike. And then she gets into the matchmaker, and everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Goes wrong to the point she is thrown out of the matchmaker's house and easily said she's not good enough. But even saying she's not good enough isn't good enough, because she actually says she's a dishonor and a disgrace to her whole family. In this moment, Mulan's whole life is all about getting to the matchmaker. It's about finding a husband. It's about having kids. And when she is thrown out, it is the biggest disgrace she could possibly have, because that was what was expected of her. And not only is she thrown out, she's publicly shamed, and all because of this role that she was groomed for. And it just goes back to those ideas of the different types of failure. I mean, she showed up, but she fell short because that's not really where she was destined to be. And when we look at failure, I really want you to hold on to this thought process of failure is what you make it. So if you hold on to shame, failure will be very shameful. But if you look at failure as a probability, where it's almost like this game that you can only fail so much until inevitably you get a win. But then again, you might have to fail 100 times or 99 times. You might have to fall short before you get to the 100. And are you going to be okay with that? I want you to pay attention to this stat. It says less than 10% of people who hit bankruptcy will be a millionaire. Well, there's 3 people that are quite well known in the world that have hit bankruptcy, but also went on to become millionaires. The first one is Walt Disney, Disneyland, Disney World, that Walt Disney. The second one is Henry Ford, as in Ford vehicles. And then the third one is Dave Ramsey. He's the finance guy. These 3 guys all hit bankruptcy, and against the odds, less than 10% of people, they became millionaires. Now, when Dave Ramsey talks about hitting bankruptcy, he talks about how he had a lot of shame and how he was burnt out and all these different things. Failure is real. It's hard. It's getting the wind knocked out of you. It's being pulled 6 feet under and finding it impossible to get back to the surface. It's a beast. You have to wrestle with that beast. But if you can embrace what it has to teach you, it can become solid ground for you. And that's why I so desperately want you to hold on to this idea of don't let other people put shame on you about your failures. Everyone has them. Everyone faces them. But it's what you make of them that will persist forward. Some stories that I'd love to share here that really shaped my idea of what failure looks like. And this has to do with the first type of failure, the due to lack of preparedness. I remember I was doing my first high school debate. We had been having all these class sessions where you had a partner and they gave you a topic and all these different things. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a debater. I have no desire to be confrontational with people. Honestly, I love to hear people's thoughts and opinions. I think there's something unique. Everybody has their own perspective and everyone's entitled to their own opinions. Basically, I'm a terrible debater is what I have to say. So by the time I got to my high school debate, and I was so excited for this debate because I had a great opening one line. But I'm going to tell you right now, that was the only good part of the whole debate is I had one good line. And so something I had learned pretty early on in high school was I was a pretty decent public speaker. So because I was a naturally good public speaker, I didn't really get nervous by it because going to the school that I went to, they had us do public presentations all the time. By the time I was a senior in high school and we did this debate, I was nervous because it was a project, but I wasn't nervous about the public speaking. So like I said, I had this great opening line. I can't even remember what it was. I think I'd said something like, "Do you feel safe?" And I said it and I felt really proud of myself in the moment and it was great. And then the debate continued and I was very poorly prepared for this debate. I didn't care about the topic. I really didn't care about any of it at all. And I was doing a decent job 2 to 4 minutes into this debate, and all of the sudden my teacher pulls out her phone and just starts taking like pictures or videoing me, and it completely threw me off, like completely derailed. And it was one of those moments where I knew it was the kind of failure where you know and you see it and you're having like this out of body experience, and it's a slow motion out of body experience where you're like, I just got derailed. I can't pull this back. And I have no clue what I'm talking about. I mean, it was like as if I got the most stage fright I had ever had in a single second. And I completely flopped the entire part of my debate. And that was something where I walked away. I had so much shame about it because I was really poorly prepared. It goes back to that first type of failure where I wasn't prepared. I showed up, but I wasn't prepared. It was something that really bothered me and it shaped my confidence and made me think, okay, maybe I'm not a good public speaker and just all these different things. But ultimately, it had to do with my level of preparedness. I wasn't prepared. And then ultimately, I didn't know how to hold myself in that moment where a lot of times when you're doing public speaking, you have to be prepared for anything. People are going to try to throw you off all the time. That was just a moment where it totally derailed. It rocked my confidence, or it shaped my confidence, and it didn't bode well for me. Moving into the second story happened when I was 22 and I was a first-time supervisor. And so I was running this department store. It was a night shift. And so this happened after 5 o'clock. On the night shifts, you have it's you and like 2 or 3 other people. The max number of workers in the store at this time would be typically like 4 people. I remember I was walking around the store as one would do, and we had an order that needed to be fulfilled in the back. So I had grabbed whatever the item was and started walking into the back. So I get into the back and all of a sudden I'd loosely heard a woman say something like, "Can I have some help?" And then I thought she was talking to one of the other workers in the store. Then just like a minute or so later, I hear over our walkie-talkie, I just hear the front desk woman say, "Christina, come to the front." And I instantly knew there was something wrong. And the next thing I hear is someone shoplifting over the walkie-talkie. I started sprinting down the store. And the funniest thing is they tell you all the time when someone is shoplifting, at least in the store I worked, they said, "We have a no chase policy." So I wasn't even allowed to go out of the store. My due diligence was I really just needed to just get the license plate and the make of the car and just like a description. So I run full force to the front of the store. I'm 22. My frontal lobe brain hasn't even developed. So I don't even know, even if I got there in time, what I would do. But it was just this instinct of I'm going to get there. So I get there they're long gone. And then when I go to review the tapes, I found out they stole somewhere between $300 to $500 worth of merchandise. And because it was later in the night, you have all these responsibilities you're supposed to do. So you walk the store, you make sure everything's like in alignment. You could see on the camera that there was a moment in time where I was up at the front, I was observing everything going on, and then I decided to start to make my rounds. They came in shortly after I started making my rounds, so they were behind me, and what they ended up doing was getting a shopping cart, and they started pulling items from like wherever they were in the aisle and dropping them in the cart. Ultimately, what they did is they ran through the front doors once they finished circling the store. And so what I had to do is I have to alert all the other stores. And it's so funny because I remember calling the other stores and thinking this was such a big deal. And then I would talk to whoever the other managers were at the store, and they were so nonchalant. They could care less. They're like, yeah, just send us the description of stuff, like whatever. Because this wasn't their first experience with shoplifters. Whereas for me, this was my first experience. I was devastated. I was so bummed. Like, how could this happen on my watch? Like, I let them go with $500 worth of merchandise. And then by the time like the next day came and I talked to the store manager and told him everything about it, and he was unfazed by it because once again, things happen. And the more life you live, the less surprised by things you are. So for me, I was all devastated because this felt like a real failure on my part. And just as he's like, yeah, you know, things happen, my Alex Karev just pops out of nowhere. And I remember he gave me a really hard time about what had happened. And it said, you know, we had just had a training about all of this prior. You could have stopped this shoplifting. You know, you could have done better. And just trying to really shame me. And I remember being like, hey, if the store manager isn't upset and things happen, then like, it's okay. Like, we will survive. Once again, one of those moments where it really shaped failure and how that was just something out of my control. As much as I can try to prevent things, there's just some things that are out of your control that you can't do, that you can't fix, or you can't solve inevitably. But it's how you respond in those moments. And so that was something that really shaped my thought process on failure. Two things that are in common with those first stories is a lot of those were my first introductions to failure. So you have my high school debate where, you know, I could have prepared more, I could have done better. And then you have the shoplifting experience from when I was a first-time supervisor and it was completely out of my control. But the one failure that sticks out more than anything else in my mind is what I would genuinely call my flatline failure. Is I was about like 18 to 19 years old and I was doing this film internship, and I'd been so psyched to do this internship, and it was one of my first times really like running the whole production by myself because the person I was interning for was going to be out of the office that day. So I had to film this video, and it was an announcement style kind of video. So we had the two actors come in, they did all the different announcements for the video I was going to put together, and then I was going to take all of the footage, I took all of the audio, and I was going to start editing it. I quickly realized after inputting all of the video that the audio didn't get recorded at all. And for any of you that have never done anything with film or audio, there are times, I swear, these devices will gaslight you where you will press the record button and it still won't record. There was this moment where with audio, and I was replaying it over in my head, I'm like, I had to have hit the record button. I had to. There was no way I couldn't have hit the record button. Well, lo and behold, I didn't hit the record button, so to say, because I didn't have the audio file. I was devastated. I sat at that computer so defeated. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I was texting my mom. I was like, I really messed up. What am I going to do? And so I ultimately had to tell my boss. And what was so cool was he's like, well, things happen. And that was it. But it was so funny because I remember going home, and I was only 18 or 19 at that point. I was just devastated. There was just no other way to go about it. But what was so unique about having a boss like that in that moment is he was very aware of, it's like, well, this is your first time doing film production. I'm teaching you everything from scratch. You are going to run into, and it's like, it's a mistake. And I remember him looking at it and he's like, it's a mistake. But what's funny is he classifies it as a mistake. And to me, I classified it as a failure because it was like that one first big moment in time where I really, really cared about what I was doing. It was a sense of ownership. That's where a lot of these failures hurt a lot more, because how much value you put onto a situation or whatever the outcome could be ultimately heightens the intensity of what that failure could feel like. If there's anything I want you to hold on to from this week's episode is don't let others put shame on you about your failures. Failures are inevitable. It's part of life. You have to go through them. And ultimately, those failures, they start as wounds and eventually they'll heal and become scars. And those scars will become a solid ground for you to really build your life off of and help you grow and teach others as well. And the second one is remember how much you invest in your said experience will result in the level of pain the failure is. So everyone has failures, and yes, it shakes your confidence, though once the wound of failure heals to a scar, you'll have a solid foundation creating a new form of confidence. All confident people have faced failure. And this one last idea I want you to hold on to is this idea of a charm bracelet. And if we look at failures as a charm, you can either hold on to them and showcase them as a milestone, so it can be something worthy of a value, or you can look at failures as shameful and they'll become these rusted little charms that nobody wants to look or touch. And what's so beautiful is even if you have had failures that have been shameful and they've rusted, you can always wipe the rust away and actually look at those moments as a milestone. It's up to you, the beholder, on how you view your own failures. So, and don't forget, failures don't feel like a light up experience in the way success does, but failure also shows you who you are, and success doesn't have that same benefit. So one of my favorite things to do is to sum this whole episode up into a phrase. And this week's episode in a phrase is, failure is either a wound or a scar. And so we can look at failure as a wound where we're bleeding out and it's hard to move forward, or failure can become a scar where it's something that we look at and doesn't have any more pain, but it's something that has helped us get to where we want to go. And our quote to live by is actually from Thomas Edison. The quote is, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Now, Thomas Edison was saying this into regards of inventing the light bulb. He had found, and they had said roughly like 10,000 different ways on how to not create a light bulb. He had almost 10,000 ways of no success. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think somewhere around like 5,000, I would have been feeling pretty defeated. So the fact he got to 10 is amazing. But isn't that such a great way to look at failure, that he found 10,000 ways that won't work. And then he did find the one way that did work. So we have to hold on to that when we view failures. So wrapping up this week's episode and looking at our key takeaways. The first one is, failure can feel like a flatline experience. 2, F is the scarlet letter for failure. 3, no one can put shame on you for your failures without you first allowing them to. 4, failure evokes a visceral reaction out of people, hence why they cringe when you see something embarrassing happen, or when someone tries to propose to another person at a baseball game and the girl says, "Please get up." And it's just that instant cringe. It evokes a visceral reaction out of people. 5, failure is either a wound or a scar. You determine the outcome. So thank you so much for hanging out with us today. It was so great getting to unravel flatline failures with you. So I'd love to connect with you more, and you can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod, and that's at Let's Unravel Pod. If you enjoyed this week's episode or the podcast show in general, please feel free to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a long way for the show. And also, please don't forget to hit the follow button anywhere that you might be listening. That could be Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. We have new episodes coming out every single Thursday. And like I said at the top of the episode, I should really be trying to get outside now. And I hope you do too. So it was great talking to you, and I'll see you again next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.